We have the great pleasure of being joined once again by Gregg Marcel Dixon. Gregg made a big splash in this space by doing the very noble deed of primarying Congressman James Clyburn earlier this summer, and you ran a very, very valiant campaign, I thought, and we loved having you the first time to talk about that. And so thank you so much for coming back, Marcel. Great to have you again.
Thank you all for having me back.
Absolutely, yeah. We wanted to talk about the Woman King movie.
Well, I wanted to do this as soon as I heard about it, because when I first heard about it, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So hang on, Hollywood greenlit a movie glorifying African slave traders because they were women. Is that right? Like the first time I heard it, I thought I must have heard wrong, or maybe this was some kind of crazy right-wing framing. And then I dug into it. I said, holy shit, no. And then the next layer that made it a must-do segment was before the backlash came. They thought all of the media stooges thought they were going to be able to get away with this. And they framed it as, I can't remember which outlet it was, but one article was circulating that said, well, yes, they did do some slave trading, but you have to look at the historical context. Whoa, 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 whoa. Haven't we been pulling down statues and changing the names of streets and schools with the argument that the historical context doesn't matter? Isn't that why we're supposed to cancel Jefferson and Ulysses S. Grant? And because there's no... So hang on. So if they're African slave traders, now all of a sudden historical context is relevant again? And then, of course, very shortly after that article came out, you had the backlash to boycott the Woman King, which they've had some Viola Davis and the production crew have had a pretty hilarious reaction to. And one final point, 2 white women wrote this.
Three, actually.
Oh, is it 3? Is it 3?
3, yes.
That is just, and they had to have known the history. So they must have just thought that the media woke washing, because it's a black woman led film, would carry them through, and they'd be able to cover all this up and shout down any voice that was raised in protest against it. So that's what I got. Marcel, I would love to hear your take.
So, when I was a kid, I, like a lot of Black Americans, because we aren't taught about African history, I had a lot of fascination with African history. I mean, I spent hours of my own time teaching myself, not just Black American history, but African history, feeling a connection to it, only to realize that African history, like the history of different continents throughout the world, is filled with a lot of bloodshed and brutality as well. Now, whether it was as bad as European history, that's a debate we can have another time. But the slave trade would not have been able to happen without the participation of some African civilizations. Did they all participate? No, but they all were impacted by it. But the Home, that's the African civilization, which is located today in the country of Benin. That country was the second most involved in the transatlantic slave trade. Before them, the Kingdom of Congo. I'm South Carolinian. Viola Davis is South Carolinian. She was born on a plantation where her great-grandparents were enslaved, as a lot of South Carolinians still live on or within a mile or so of where our ancestors were enslaved, especially on these massive rice plantations. When the movie came out, I was excited to see African history being displayed, but that was just when I got a sneak peek of it. I didn't know they were going to try to make these woman kings, which that, by the way, is an oxymoron. You can't be a woman and a king. That's another thing we'll talk about later, how Black women can never just be feminine and be woman. They always have to be masculine and stronger than the men. That's the I'm a strong Black woman who don't need no man stereotype. But when I found out that they was going to make these people heroes, it was very troublesome. And not just for me, apparently. Lupita Nyong'o, who is of African descent, Kenyan, she's of Luo descent, she was excited when she landed the role. So excited, she went to Benin to explore the country's history, the history of the Dahomey. When she found out how involved they were in this transatlantic slave trade. And she found out and heard the experiences of people on the continent who are still living from the ramifications of their involvement in the slave trade, just how brutal they were. She broke down in tears on camera. And she said at the end of that documentary that any portrayal of this particular tribe, this civilization, must acknowledge their brutal involvement in the slave trade. She came back, and shortly thereafter, she walked away from the role. Now, they tried to say they wanted a younger actress for the role she was going to play. What I personally believe happened is she came back and she said to them, hey, we cannot make these people heroines or heroes. And they probably had a script that was going in the direction. Lupita Nyong'o, who says no. Now, the thing that's crazy, Viola Davis is a victim of the Home's involvement in transatlantic slave trade, as am I. Lupita Nyong'o on East Africa descent is not. So it just kind of bothers me how Viola Davis would co-sign a movie that portrays these barbarians as heroines. I wouldn't support a movie portraying Thomas Jefferson as a hero or a founding father. I'm sure as hell not going to portray the people who were complicit with that particular era of history as heroines either, even if they're Black women. My pain is not lessened because the person perpetrating it is a Black woman.
And then, all right, and then they came out and actually, in response to the backlash that they got, they lied. They lied. They tried to claim that this king who's portrayed in the film made the hard moral choice of coming out against slavery. It's total bullshit. It's bullshit. The British had to blockade the Dahomey after they outlawed slavery because they didn't want to stop slave trading. Those are the first conflicts that they were having with the Europeans.
So what happened was King, I don't know if, but I think it's pronounced Gizo. He ended up selling some of his own relatives to the European enslavers because he wanted to be king. And when he died, they brutally sacrificed 800 enslaved people. Okay? So this thing that he made the hard moral choice to stop it, it's all fictionalized. And in interviews, Viola Davis and these three white women, I'm not surprised at the actions of the white women. I expected them. These are white liberals. White liberals are always the most anti-Black. They just do it with a smile on their face. I'm not surprised at them. But when Viola Davis did the interview, they asked her, how is it going to deal with that subject matter? They promised it will be dealt with in a manner that will be authentic. Absolutely not. Also, the British, they weren't abolishing transatlantic slave trade out of any moral high ground. They were just doing it because they wanted to keep a labor force there on the continent because they were starting to colonize the continent. However, the fact is, though, that the Kingdom of Congo at that time had been warring with the Portuguese to try to stop the transatlantic slave trade because some of their rulers realized that, hey, this is hurting the continent. This is hurting our trade network. Dahomey was completely like, nah, not going to stop. This is our income here. We are going to keep supplying you with people to enslave. This was also part of the issue that happened with the colonization of what is now called Liberia. People there were still insistent on trying to, dare I say, sell human beings to Europeans, and the Black Americans, who oftentimes were forced to go to Liberia under duress, and about over half of them would eventually die from tropical diseases, were fighting to stop it. So slavery was just as intrinsic with the Africans on the west and central coast of the continent that participated in it. All of them did not. It was just as intrinsic for them as it was for the Europeans.
Well, and this is where I feel like, in a way, this film is backfiring because it's forcing a conversation about that really wasn't happening. I don't think a lot of people are aware of how complicit certain African tribes were in the slave trade because the Europeans, as you say, it wouldn't have been possible without that cooperation because the Europeans had no immunity to the tropical diseases of Africa. They were very hesitant to go inland on expeditions. They relied on the African tribes to do that for them and to bring the slaves to the coast where they weren't as likely to fall victim to those diseases. That's certainly not something that people push front and center when they talk about this history.
Well,
And this film has forced that conversation. It's forced a spotlight on it.
Well, it's not just tropical diseases and the tsetse fly that spread it, a lot of diseases. Europeans did try to penetrate the interior of the African continent. But here's something that I had to learn. I was always taught that the Europeans were able to dominate a lot of the African civilizations because they had better weaponry. Come to find out, they did have better weaponry, but even then, they still got their tails whipped every time they tried to penetrate the interior of the African continent. And they would then go back to Europe and say, well, our people died from tropical diseases. Really, they were killed because they tried to invade Benin City, the Benin Empire, which was in modern day Nigeria, and they had metal, weapons of iron. They had, well, not weapons of iron, they had weapons of metal, and yet they still were horrifically defeated. The Europeans really could not withstand the defensive forces of a lot of African civilizations. So really, if the African civilizations, those that did participate, if they had never participated, the transatlantic slave trade would have never happened because the Europeans, even with better weaponry, simply could not overwhelm them because the African civilizations had better weapons, they knew the landscape, and they were formidable fighters, which is how they were able to conquer other civilizations that trade with them. Now, I do want to say, for someone like me and a lot of Black Americans, it's always been well known that African civilizations participated in the slave trade. I've visited the African continent 6 times. There's something that they pretty much accept. But now they will always try to downplay everyone from their particular tribe and their historical civilization for which their lineage is part of. They always try to downplay it, but they all kind of acknowledge they did. And by the fact, the first time I went to Nigeria, first thing that happened to me was some people apologized. And they said they don't feel like until they apologize that they will be able to develop in the way they should. Now, I will say this. There's been some bad faith people trying to now use this movie to try to absolve Europeans or white Americans of their brutality. And that's not going to fly because even though these African civilizations were selling human beings for something as minuscule as bottles and umbrellas, the wealth, the immense wealth, mostly went to Europe and white Americans. So in the sense of reparations, I heard that lady who's a spokesperson for the royal family in Britain talk about saying, well, we need to start where the supply chain started. I want to say to her, if she ever watches this, first of all, you don't tell me where to start for where I'm old. And second of all, Britain, if you being British, you don't have any right to tell us anything about what we need to do about what we're old, because if any country is indebted to people of African descent, and Black Americans too, it is Britain, which is one of the main players in the slave trade.
You know, it's interesting you say that because I thought the exact same thing when it comes to like the right-wing anti-woke critique of this film. And I think there are a lot of people who sort of traffic in this sort of false conflation, like you saw Bill Maher do a monologue talking about how, you know, slavery is not a uniquely American thing or a white thing, right? That, you know, all cultures, people of all different, you know, colors, you know, have enslaved people over the course of, you know, the last, you know, few thousand years. And that's true. But I think what a lot of these right wingers are doing is they are conflating a critique of the white race with a critique of American and Western history, right? So like that Africans and Arabs traded slaves, that is perhaps a relevant point to make when sort of trying to evaluate the extent to which the white race is uniquely evil, sure. But it's not a relevant point to make when judging, or in this case, excusing the sin of American slavery, right? American slavery is its own sin. And we, as Americans, have to make right by our sin. To point to other cultures and say, well, they did it too, that's bullshit. That is a very sad try for a cop-out, in my view. Right?
I completely agree. You know, one thing about America...
And it's this sort of like sleight of hand. It's a sleight of hand because they do it so quick that you don't even realize it. Anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. One thing about America, we like to have it both ways. We want to say that we are unique, or one of a kind. Okay, so we can't say, well, everybody else was doing it as an excuse. Second of all, slavery in the Americas, especially the British colonies, was chattel slavery, which is quite different from just slavery. Chattel slavery is when a human being is treated as property, and because of whatever distinctive feature. In the case of the America, it was if you were Black, then you were automatically considered property. Okay, there were a few free Black Americans, but the majority were definitely enslaved. And when it comes to the talk about reparations, Bill Maher, who's another white liberal ally, he wants to talk about what other cultures have done. Okay, well, check this out. Germany paid reparations to the Holocaust survivors, okay? These African civilizations that enslaved us, they owe us too if they were still around. The thing is, though, a lot of them fell. Some of them fell at the beginning of colonization, and some of them actually became richer during colonization, but would eventually collapse too because of eternal warfare. And America itself has actually paid reparations to groups it has wronged. So America saying, well, other groups is doing it too. I mean, America has done wrong to other groups as well, and they've repaired it by reparative action that other countries have done to other groups. They can do the same for us. So I don't buy this narrative that some people are trying to use, saying that, oh, because Africans were complicit in it, that somehow absolves America. Because one, okay, Africans are to blame too. I'm not African. I'm a Black American. I am a result of a terrible, terrible partnership between African civilizations that participated in the transatlantic slave trade, Europeans that participated in the transatlantic slave trade, and the American government that have received trillions of dollars from the labor and intellect of my people while violently preventing my lineage from receiving the wealth that we should have received, from which we still suffer today. So all of them then are complicit, and all of them are indebted to my lineage.
I think you're 100% right. And, the question of reparations is not just a moral question, but it's a question of dollars and cents, right? I mean, where'd most of the money go? Most of the money didn't go to the Africans who sold their own people to the West. Most of the money went to the West in terms of the immense wealth generated by the West off the hundreds of years of free labor, forced labor, stolen labor for multiple, 10 generations?
I hate to say this, though. You can see the African continent is paying for its, Europe is paying too. Europe is always in a constant state of warfare or right on the verge of civil conflict, which is why the United Nations and European Union exist. But I'll end with this. The African continent is definitely paying too for its sins, which is why even though those countries have been developing, and I don't buy into the Africans a impoverished-stricken continent, but they definitely have been struggling to reach the level of development that they should reach based on their resources. So if anybody wants to give some solace, they're definitely paying to me for the sin of what they did to, be honest, other people.
Well, one more question. Sorry, go ahead, Russell.
Let me ask you, since we got onto this topic. So a couple things. I agree with everything that you both said. I think there are certain, and you pointed out, and point taken, that African Americans are aware of African complicity in the slave trade. There's a whole white woke world where history just doesn't really exist, where it's this incredible just distortion of history to tailor fit whatever ideological agenda they want to push at a certain moment. Now, the only reason these things are important to me to be aware that, Mar's right. There was slavery everywhere that you had sufficiently developed civilizations. It's important to know that because you do have this element of the left that kind of paints this picture that human evil is a uniquely European phenomenon. And it's important not to believe that, because if you want to make a better world, you need to base it on the realities of human history, not fantasies of human history. If you think that human evil is uniquely white, you're going to be very surprised when you change the power structure and you still have human evil.
Yeah.
Also, with slave trades, I'm sure, that's a great point. I'm sure Black Americans are more aware of, say, the Arab slave trade. White
Yes.
people really don't talk about that. They don't talk about that. They're actually, I find if you present that to white people, that the Arab slave trade lasted from 600 AD down to the 1960s, and they castrated all of the men, they don't know anything about it. They don't know anything about that. The reason you don't have a population demanding reparations in the Middle East is because there was no next generation. They castrated them. So what do you think about that? Like, that element of this conversation seems to be missing.
Well, I'll tell you what's funny. A lot of white people that I speak with here in South Carolina, the ones that may very well be anti-Black, the moment I mention reparations, someone will say, well, y'all sold each other. So funny, they may not know any other area of history. They sure know that part. They heard about Africans. I tell them, well, one, I have to get something straight with them. I'm never going to justify evil. But the Africans, just like Europeans, have always had civil war. In fact, Europe has had the worst civil wars. World War I, World War II were pretty much European civil wars that dragged the world in. Africans don't view each other and say, well, there's no one European identity. There's never been one African identity.
Right,
They've always viewed each other by different ethnicities or tribes or civilizations. I told them we did not sell each other. They sold what they saw as enemy nations. And I told them, too, the strange thing is we do have to acknowledge that evil comes in all shades. And the reason that's very important now, me being a reparationist, I'm running against people that I feel are politically evil. And they come in all colors. The white politicians don't do the damn thing for Black Americans. That's almost to be expected for me. But the Black politicians who give the facade of being forced don't do a damn thing for Black Americans. And sometimes they are more opposed to policies specifically for descendants of American slaves. And I just want to land because I know I may not have much time left. Right now, there's a bill in Congress, and it's a bill to give, and I'm not going to call it reparations, but to acknowledge and address the wrong that was done to Black World War II veterans who were locked out of the trillions of dollars that white World War II veterans got via the GI Bill. My great-grandfather, who is still alive and living in New York City, he was a World War II veteran, didn't get a penny to which he could leave his daughter. My grandmother.
He's alive now?
Huh?
He's alive now?
He's alive now. Yes, he's like 98. My great grand aunt is 98. Yes. A lot of people in my family have long longevity. We drink a tea here called Life Everlasting down here in the South Carolina coast. So, but guess
get them
what?
to sponsor the show. That tea.
That's what was that what Ponce de Leon was looking for down there?
Yeah, right.
Well, he went to Florida, so that was his fault for not going to the right area. But make it quick. That bill was written by a white congressman in Massachusetts, Seth Moulton,
I think, yeah.
Moulton, right.
Yeah, ran for president for a
Clyburn
few
is
weeks.
a co-sponsor, but my thing is this: Clyburn's been in office for 30 years. Moulton just got in office, 2018. A white politician is doing something specifically for descendants of American slaves, while Black politicians have sat there for 30 years and watched us lose our land and live in poverty. Evil is in all colors, and that is true.
All right.
So
do you mind if I
where do
ask
we
you one
sign you
more
up
thing?
to volunteer for the Kamala Harris campaign?
Yeah. Right. Is it all right if I ask you one more thing, because it's related to that? Because you ran for Congress, and you only got a few points in the final vote, which was to be expected. I mean, you're running a grassroots campaign against one of the top Democrats in the nation. I don't even think you expected to win. You were running as a way to make a point, and you made that point loud and clear, to the point where a lot of people, a lot of very, very powerful people, a lot of real wheeler dealer Democrat types heard you and trashed you when you lost. I'm talking about guys like Roland Martin. Bakari Sellers was the next name out of my mouth, right? These these are Black mouthpieces for the establishment wing of the Democratic Party. And the way that relates almost to what we're talking about, the Woman King, in the trailer of the Woman King, there's this song. It goes something like, you're not going to take my power, this obsession with power. And I feel like amongst this certain echelon of the liberal class, right, the real top people, whether they're white, Black, whatever, Their obsession is with power. How you actually wield that power is a secondary, if not tertiary, matter. Like, they don't really worry about what you do with that power. The pursuit of power is this hero's journey in their minds, and that reflects in the film, right? It's all about just getting power, winning power. A black woman winning power is supposedly a victory for all black women. And that seems to be the point of view of this film. And it also seems to be the point of view of a lot of the people who really trashed you after you lost.
It is. Let me tell you what's funny, though. Not only were they paying attention, so was Time Magazine and Breitbart, because I've actually gotten more attention and more partnerships, which will soon be announced, since my election has ended, and I'm running again. But let me say something that we haven't spoken about here: the evil of white feminism. That's the same evil that, in my opinion, tells black women, abort your babies, tells black women, you don't need no man. That's why in The Woman King, it's the women are being referred to as king. When white women are put in movies, Wonder Woman, Charlie's Angels, they're shown as being feminine, still strong and powerful and formidable, but still feminine and beautiful. When black women are shown as being strong, they're almost masculine, and the black men almost play a secondary or tertiary to them. Look at Black Panther 2. It's all about, they could have recasted T'Challa, and T'Challa is a very important Marvel character, but now when you look at the commercials, it's all about black women and how black men aren't needed. It's a dangerous message that white feminism and stupid anti-black people co-sign, that black men are somehow not needed in society. And it goes back to the original white progressive anti-blackness of no black man in the house type welfare policies that is not meant to help us. It's meant to destroy our families and send a message that black men are unnecessary. And when black men are present, they are a threat. Just like that Harriet Tubman movie they came out with, which I didn't watch. Not watching that either, where they made up a fake black male antagonist who was a slave catcher, and they acknowledged no such character existed in reality. Harriet Tubman spent most of her time running from white people who were enslavers, okay? Not some mysterious anti-black man. It is a dangerous message that these anti-black men, black women are sending, and white feminists, black white men and white women, usually liberals, are trying to send to black people that black men are not necessary, and all we need are black women to be strong and masculine. And I'm not going to co-sign it. We need black men, black women together. Strong black families build strong black communities.
All righty. Well, Marcel, I could talk to you forever, but thank you so much for carving out a half hour for us. It was great to talk to you again. Absolutely.
Thank y'all. Take care.
Thank you very much, Marcel.
Thank you.
Please clap.